Okay, almost there. Okay, we should be good to go. Guys, welcome to episode 4 of The Proof by Periti Digital. Guest today is fellow Irishman, Ben Ó Mathúin, who's here to talk to us about all things customer lift, customer success, and what he has learned during his time in the industry. So, Ben, very welcome to the pod. Thanks for hopping on.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Happy to be here.
I'm trying to think of where we came across each other first. So I think it was in the small circle that is the RevOps community in Dublin, a mutual customer that we had. We've obviously spoken a good few times in not only during business but in the prep for the podcast. But just to explain to the guys who is Ben Ó Mathúin, what you do, give the guys a bit of an overview.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm probably about 12 years now in SaaS. And always kind of within the customer success ecosystem. But wherever I've been from a customer success perspective, so whether early career starting off as a customer success manager up to the point of kind of building out account management teams, running kind of revenue orgs, I've always found myself leaning towards customer success, not as simply a post-sale function, but that full kind of go-to-market engine. And that was even very early career, where we kind of would look at CS and we go, okay, these elements of kind of problems that are happening within the CS org, but how does that actually relate to like what's happening mid and upper funnels? I kind of call myself the CS guy, but that's just like hyper focused on the kind of full commercial organization, and that really, post sale can't sit in silo and really should be part of kind of a full revenue engine.
Yeah, on the kind of full revenue side and that 360 view, obviously with the focus on CS. In practice, what does that mean in terms of how you kind of support clients and how you help businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose from the outside looking in, I very much am, the kind of customer success leader. I operate fractionally, typically working with kind of 2, 3, maximum of 4 businesses at once. And what I typically do is I'll go in, I'll analyze, diagnose what's happening within their customer success organization. There's typically an ask from the founder of, we've had an increase in churn, or we feel like we could be doing more from an expansion perspective. Would you mind just, looking under the hood and seeing what you come away with? That's often where an engagement will start for me, is I'll kind of go in and do a full 360. So although I'm like focusing on churn or expansion, I'm kind of also looking at, well, what was the message that was used coming in the door? What is what we're saying from a go-to-market and from an AE perspective? Is that the reality of what onboarding actually looks like? And so I built kind of frameworks over the years that I can kind of slice and dice that. Of course, we're looking at maybe churn as a problem or expansion as the kind of main objective, but it's how does each touch point that the customer experienced along that customer journey have a positive or negative impact? And so with that, I suppose the practical element is often I need to sit with, the revenue leaders on the go-to-market side, sitting with kind of those sales leaders or those marketing leaders and saying, hey guys, do you know that that's what we're saying at the moment is not the reality for a customer? We've kind of taken our product X and we've made them really sexy and really cool from a sales perspective, and it's closing deals. But the reality is a little bit left to center to that. And that's often like a silo you'll see in not only kind of early stage startup businesses, but as you grow all the way to enterprise level, that there often can be a natural disconnect and drift from the reality of what it is to be a customer. And so that's something I often look at is like, what is it like as a day in the life of a customer? And can our go-to-market or our new business teams communicate that in a very effective way?
Yeah, I think you do it in terms of communication, just to play on that piece. I think that's something that you do an excellent job of, not only from the content you produce, but also from kind of following the journey you've been on over the last while. I think if you're in the industry or you're in the space we're in, we know how important customer success is, and it's always easier to hold on to a customer or to sell to an existing customer than it is to sell net new. However, the sales, marketing, the sexy side of things, as you said, is always what tends to get the attention. And I think your content and particularly if anyone wants to check out Ben's LinkedIn, is great at really unveiling the value that CS has to offer. Yet, I think what I find a lot is that businesses tend to see CS as more of a cost center than a value driver. Is there obviously people are reaching out when they have an issue, or that typically they may leave it too late, but is there an education piece as part of your work, or do businesses really understand the value that CS can offer when they bring you in?
It's a really good question, Dan. I think the market has definitely shifted in the last 5 years, and then even more so in the last 12 months, I would say, the language around customer success. So definitely 5 years ago, I would have said they're totally siloed. For the most part, you'll speak to a VP of sales or a CRO, and they're a little bit not allergic to customer success, but it's kind of a team that maybe sits in somewhere else. That shift has definitely happened, has compounded massively. And you speak to some of the top CROs out there, like they're demanding CS reports into them, and that's the way it should be. I think where often I see kind of the main opportunity is the foundations of a good CS org are not overly complicated and don't take a massive amount of effort or engineering or tooling, but often you do need to take a step back to be able to move forward. And what often happens, and what I see time and time again, particularly a lot of my work focuses on the earlier stage business, so that's your kind of seed up to Series B, is that, and you touched on this, kind of sales and marketing is a little bit sexier, a little bit more high energy, and that's where founders are naturally drawn to. And I've had countless amounts of conversations with early stage founders who are still very small, like team size of like under 20 people. And they're asking me to come in to support, to manage customers. I just want somebody to manage my customers, because founders just, by default get real kick. The commercial founder gets a kick out of sales and running that kind of pipeline, that's still founder-led sales. And I'm always very direct with those founders and say, your customers are your most valuable source of information from a product development perspective, from your overall go-to-market motion, from your ICP. To outsource the management of customers, albeit, customers are a pain in the ass because they're going to tell you your product isn't as good as you thought it was. They're going to tell you that, ultimately it's not delivering value, and the value of what you're building is being questioned. Customer success is a real messy place to be in. And as a result, then we kind of drift towards the maybe sexier go-to-market kind of sales motion. And so I'm very firm with that. I'm like, your customer base, you're sitting on not only revenue, but the amount of information from a product development roadmap perspective, who is actually your ideal customer. I think there's a lot of untapped energy there.
It sounds like there's a real need for a growth mindset in that space. Then if you're getting hit with those home truths about what's wrong with your product, and here's what's wrong with your customer service function, or it's taking SLAs, or it's taking too long to get my queries answered, it sounds like there's a real need to look in the mirror from a company's perspective when they're actually evaluating their CS org and how they can improve. I know you mentioned, was it a seed to Series B? You mentioned it's typically where you would come in. Why do you think that area of the market is ripe for the work you do and for that CS infrastructure?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I speak a lot about this because I think I obsess about the idea of the company and the business as a very much like a living, breathing organism. And we need to look at the business from that full 360 view. And that's like, partnering with finance, really understanding the P&L, understanding what is the cost of adding headcount and potential risk if they're not resulting in ROI. All these little things really need to be understood at all stages of business. But I think for me, most excitingly is on that earlier stage. And I get drawn to that because I think that's where my natural tendency is hands-on building. Although I come in and I'm kind of quite strategic, and I very much operate at an altitude that in many ways comes above the founder and kind of will guide them in their decision-making from an overall kind of revenue perspective. I think that earlier stage, you need to be able to build 0 to 1 very quickly. And I don't have all the answers. In most cases, build 0 to 1, and then all of a sudden it's version 1B, 1C, 1D until you kind of get to a point that works for the business. And I think that's a very valuable skill set to those earlier stage businesses. I think when you get to Series B beyond, and you're now a headcount of 150 people, or 15 million in ARR, and the ambition that you're telling back to the board is we're going to grow from 15 million to 50 million. I think that's a different skill set. I think that's really about kind of turning the screw a little bit more on the foundations that have been built. And I think where I'm quite strong is more on those foundations at 0 to 1. And I suppose I love handing it off then to that different type of leader. I don't think anyone's better or worse kind of revenue leader. I just think it's a very different skill set. And I think when we kind of understand that and kind of have an image of what that kind of profile looks like for the business's stage, again, founders can kind of tap into the various different talent they need at their different growth stages.
And even when we were talking in preparation for the pod today, and the layout or a typical engagement and what that looks like on your side, obviously in those kind of say seed to Series B, you can get quite a vast array of different shapes and sizes.
It's still a very broad range,
companies.
right?
but it sounds like there is quite a defined roadmap for what a good engagement looks like on your side, based on what we discussed previously.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if my typical engagement is where I'll go in for, I aim within 2 weeks to have a very good understanding of the business at a macro level. Of course, I don't understand the ins and outs and the kind of intricacies, but typically across, and within that 2 weeks, I'm asking founders to share access to absolutely everything, right? So that's their CRM instance, that's their call recordings, that's all their definitions of ICP. That's just like any bit of context they have in the business. And again, like in today's world, I've skills now built that can kind of just run on top of that and can give me a very quick understanding and scoring of where potential leaks are for me to start like looking under the hood and then diagnosing a little bit more. So typically within 2 to 3 weeks, I've got a good diagnosis of we're dealing with a stellar like CS team here that have no process whatsoever, and it's simply been held together by really good people and sellotape. Or we have process, but there has never been coaching, enablement, mentorship on what makes a mediocre CSM when it comes to managing an enterprise relationship, for example, versus that like top 1% CSM who can go in and renew a 200K deal through their annual review and are always kind of commercially minded. It can typically be one of those. And what I'll typically do is kind of after those 2 3 weeks, I'll present back like a list of areas or opportunities for improvement. We kind of lock in with the founder and say, hey, I think these are your two highest priorities for now. Let's commit on these, and then let's kind of go and execute. And then I'll execute on them in iterations of upwards of 4 to 12 weeks in cycles. And that's a constant feedback loop. So I kind of typically in my engagements, I aim to kind of demand a minimum of kind of 30 minutes of that founder's time once a week, where we can have a very close breadth of what's happening in terms of momentum, but also it can be incredibly helpful for that founder to have fresh eyes. Again, because I look at the whole go-to-market motion as well as product, because CS sit on so much information and valuable information in relation to product that I often will kind of speak about feedback loops and how kind of CS can really tap into that product org a little bit better. So those 30-minute syncs can be very valuable simply because I'm in the business. I have a lot of insight into various different things that when we work in the business can be very difficult just to see, right? Because we're stuck in our lane and it can be very difficult. So one of the values of me coming in is that, like I said, I'm at that altitude that I can start to power back maybe some opportunities or some blind spots that, founders or teams may have.
Yeah, and if we get kind of strategic for a second as well, because I know when we encountered each other, it was around a HubSpot project,
Uh-huh.
HubSpot Service Hub project, and
Yeah.
I know when you're doing the initial deep dive, when they let you into their instance, you're surveying the lay of the land, you're identifying the gaps, and then you're getting your hands dirty. I think that's a big theme from what I'm picking up from the conversations we've had. That you're not just I think was it the term you use, a kick the can consultant in a way, and you hover above the founder, but you also like to get into the weeds.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction just on that because and there's often as well in my engagements I'm super conscious of that because the first 2 to 4 weeks is very much diagnostics, looking at the plan, and then it's about output and delivery, right? Because you as working in the mode that I do, you have to be delivering output and momentum at every single point. And that's something I really pride myself on is that, as every week moves along, there is clear, tangible progression across the various kind of projects that we've identified because I think we've all been there before where we agree on something and then 6 weeks later we're like, has that moved along or where are we? And I suppose again something I'll always kind of, because I don't necessarily work in the business, I demand that momentum, and if things are blocked, well then we have to kind of call that out, and that can be a broader cultural problem within the business as well.
Yeah, and I think that's if we could segue to that for a second, is that something, do you think, that CROs or founders and when the powers that be bring you in, is that something they tend to underestimate? The amount of, I suppose, momentum you're going to bring to the engagement, and you're going to keep teams accountable, because I know firsthand that that's always a case where if a team feels like they're bringing in an expert to help out, that's their excuse to kind of wipe their hands and let you take over.
Yeah,
How has that worked in practice for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose I'm pretty lucky in every engagement I've had to date. The initial kind of feedback after 3 weeks is like, "Whoa, that was quick." You've got a good understanding of what's been going on, and I typically don't bring anything new to the founders. They've kind of felt it. They know probably these are the things that are causing kind of concern and frustration. But I think what's incredibly helpful is to have it articulated in a very structured way and say, here is the plan to fix these, and here is how we will get there. builds that natural momentum. And there is a little bit of an agreement, a kind of just a handshake coming in the door to say like anything I need if we're in terms of developing out these projects. And again, it's something I'm very kind of clear on is I typically don't come in and say, oh, you need X, Y, and Z tool, or you're going to have to hire more people. I'm coming from that seat of the founder where I know budgets are probably constrained, right? The solution is not going to be throw more money at the problem. It's for them. It's looking at the resources that we already have within the business and how can we better utilize that. Now, of course, there are areas where more tools and more people may make sense, but that's not the default either, right? We need to look at what we have within the business and how can we better optimize that. And it is momentum is something that then I do think can cross pollinate across the business when people actually see, oh, well, we're moving quite fast over here.
Hmm.
Why aren't the rest of the teams moving quite fast? And it can be helpful for a founder to see what is possible in kind of a short period of time. And again, so a lot of the engagements I have, although I come in to support customer success, in a kind of textbook traditional sense, I find I gravitate across the whole businesses.
Yeah. No, I think it is that point around, I suppose things are comfortable. It may not seem like it if a business is growing fast, but things may be comfortable and they may be going through the motions as you work on a thing. And then all of a sudden the new force comes in, stirs things up, gets some momentum going. And then not only the gaps in the processes start being filled, but overall gaps in mindset or attitude or urgency start becoming quite apparent. And I suppose if you're on a scaling journey as a business, you can't afford that to fester and
No,
linger as
absolutely.
you're trying to secure investment, grow, make waves in the industry you're in.
Yeah. I just another point on that though as well, which I'm always really conscious to like give credit to, like the role of the founder and the role of like the CRO or that like first VP of sales. It's a really, really difficult role, like job to have, like that founder's job in terms of growing out team, trying to manage runway, making those big bets, like is now the time to bring in our first VP of sales or CRO. Like it's quite a large context to like just consistently have like operating within your mind. And as a result, you have that load. And then you also have just the day-to-day operations of running the business, right? And you're dragged into meetings. And again, you want to be involved in everything because it's your business. So it can be really helpful. And sometimes I find myself just gently pulling the founder up a little bit and saying, do you think you need to go to that meeting? Like maybe you take that 30 minutes for yourself to work on that project you kind of have always spoken to. And I've had some founders come to me and be like, God, you're a little bit like a chief of staff in a way. You help me just, kind of pull myself up. And I think that's really important for like founders and senior revenue leaders because like they're really difficult and the world's changing every day at the moment. I think any senior leader trying to execute growth, it's not easy.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. There was a term that I heard. It was from a guy called Sahil Bloom who spoke about. He wrote a book. It was out recently, and he talked about. I think it was Bill Gates and other kind of major CEOs and founders who've had wild success have always adopted the practice of a think day or a think week, and not necessarily a VP of sales in a fast growing company can't take a week out just to think. That half an hour, the benefit of stepping away, getting out of the day-to-day, getting out of the weeds and actually focusing on the bigger picture and what's going on and what they need to do from a systematic perspective to ensure that growth trajectory is maintained is uber important. I find it myself. I know the team here, there's times we just get sucked into the weeds and you kind of forget the general direction that you want to go. But it's so important to kind of step out. If I can turn the mirror back on yourself, how do you do that in the current practice? If you are a guy that's constantly balancing the big picture thinking and the process and systematic input that you bring to the table, but also you are doing the hands-on work as well and getting your hands dirty with the teams. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there's a few natural constraints. So again, my engagements, I'm never there 5 days a week. It can be anywhere from a couple of hours up to maybe two, maximum 3 days a week, depending on the engagement. That would probably be only for a reasonably short time. So there's that natural constraint that kind of you can only work on what's valuable and what is driving momentum. And naturally that keeps you at a momentum because you can't get sucked in. I think what's also really helpful with If Knows over time is like there's no direct reports. I'm not anybody's manager. And that allows such a big, simply just calendar time, and because I'm not booked, I'm not dragged into meetings I don't need to be in because I'm not a member of the team. But at the same time, when I need to pull people to get stuff done, I have the time to do a lot of the heavy lifting for those individuals to get their momentum going. Because often, again, if I'm pulling from the leaders within product or from finance, whatever the case is, everybody is incredibly busy and doing their best within the business. But if I can spot and say, okay, I need this from product, but I can do 0 to 20% of that and get that going myself, it gives that individual a bit of like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, actually, this is a project I wanted to get. I know it's going to be beneficial for the business. You've actually started, like that initial 0 to 1 is often the most difficult part. And to be able to do that then allows them to be able to kind of take it on then and work on it. So I think, like I said, the natural constraint of working in days and then not having any calendars or meetings in the calendar is incredibly helpful. And my pure focus is just on value. Is this driving momentum at all times? And it's a conscious reflection at the end of every day. This is, am I operating at the altitude I need to kind of deliver value? And it's not easy. I do find myself being sucked into the business and I do have to go, hold on a minute, that's not what I'm here to do. And I need to kind of, step away.
Yeah. Yeah. And as part of that stepping away, obviously the onus is on you to, I suppose, hone your craft, keep up with the advancements in the industry, best practice, all of that good stuff. It's something we've seen this year, particularly if we focus in on the customer success side of things. Again, we're starting to see a lot bigger, more complex and more exciting projects in the HubSpot ecosystem based solely around the HubSpot Service Hub. HubSpot development team have put a lot of time and effort into improving the tool. We've seen it play out in practice. We're now competing with the best of the best when it comes to these big RFP projects and how Service Hub can help there. From a general kind of CS and best practice perspective, because sometimes we're too in the weeds of the platform and the functionality and not as much on the process side of things on this side of the fence. How do you, I suppose, double barrel question, but how do you keep up with those best practice developments? And also, what are you excited about what's coming down the pipe in the land of customer success?
Yeah, I think particularly at the moment, I think there is definitely, I'm sure everybody feels this, an anxiety around like keeping up, particularly with like AI development, right? And I think my advice to anyone, not that I have a crack at all, is community. So find communities where people obsess about this stuff, whether that's like WhatsApp groups, Slack channels, like just immerse yourself in stuff. And I genuinely do like take 15 minutes a day through a couple of different communities I'm in. And I just stroll through like what people are talking about, and find new things. And I think that's just really important in terms of the AI kind of just race of what's happening today. I think from a tooling perspective, so like, you touched on HubSpot and I have a love-hate relationship with HubSpot. I often joke and say like, they're kind of like the Ryanair model of CRM, right? You get you in the door and then slowly but surely we start tacking on all the different bits. But in every engagement I have, I will recommend HubSpot because it allows the business to grow. It allows the business to grow and HubSpot can very easily kind of grow with them. And for the last couple of years, it was quite difficult because HubSpot were never really very good at the customer success stuff. Like support and ticketing was there, but when it came to enterprise CS motions in terms of managing account plans and managing renewal pipelines, it was always built for that sales organization and could never quite do that. I think what HubSpot have done in the last kind of 9 months, 12 months or so with their CS workspace has really transformed HubSpot's ability to add value to the whole business as a 360. And it's modular and allows you then, like I said, to be able to grow with it. So I think from a tooling perspective, I think the cost to value is very strong. And the fact that it can be quite modular. And there's a lot of noise from tooling as well, right? There's incredible like new businesses coming out of kind of incubators and coming out of San Francisco at the moment. There's a couple of them I'm kind of, dabbling with at the moment. There's tried and tested are really important. And I think everyone needs foundational good tech. And I'm kind of swapping out tooling is just expensive. Costs energy, it costs money. There's, like questions happen in terms of a sales process. It can just slow and distract the business that I really hate. Tool acquisition, I think, is the biggest distraction we all have as in a business. So I think start out laying down your foundations, and then as you grow and kind of go beyond your Series B and you have a bit more cash runway, maybe it's then you do a bit of a tech audit. But from the earlier stages, you don't need anything with too many bells and whistles.
And it sounds like you're right on the precipice in terms of those new developments, talking about everything coming out from San Fran, messing around with those tools that are coming out of there. You're right at the forefront. When it comes to that community piece, I think that's a great shout because it's like that old adage, if you hang around with 5 of your friends and they all go to jail, guess who the sixth person who goes to jail is, Where would you recommend Is it the kind of LinkedIn, Reddit, Substack communities? Are you talking about in-person stuff, maybe here on the island of Ireland?
Yeah.
What do you find most valuable from a practical sense to learn about this
Yeah,
stuff?
I think it's a mix of everything, right? Like Dublin and Ireland has a great tech ecosystem. You know, you've got Dogpatch Labs, you've got Baseline. There's a lot happening, but I think you need to look for it. About 3 years ago, I kind of had the realization that I built a career, but not a community. I was just solely just plugging away on my own, trying to figure it out, and then kind of penny dropped one day, and it was like there's a whole lot of other people like me trying to figure this out. Like, you know, why are we sharing notes and catching catching up for coffees? I'm also a member of Pavilion, and they're kind of a global network of revenue leaders who I just, you know, they're an incredible bunch of literally global revenue leaders, a couple of thousand of members with incredible kind of resources in terms of educational as well as Slack kind of channels. So for any revenue leader out there, I would always give Pavilion a shout. I think they're an opportunity to kind of tap into some of the greatest minds that are kind of working on some of the challenges we face as go-to-market leaders.
Nice. And I know we're just coming up to time, and I want to be respectful of it, but I know where to find you when we join forces going forward again, like we have done in the past. But for any of the listeners who are interested in what you have to talk about, who want to reach out, want to connect on all things CS and beyond, where is best for the guys to find you?
Yeah, probably LinkedIn. Really, that's where I'm most vocal, and that's where I can, you know, I'm in my DMs most of the day. So if you ever just want to kind of jump on and ask me a question, LinkedIn, Ben Ó Mathúin, customerlift.co. That's kind of I operate under that kind of that brand. So you'll find more information there in terms of my diagnostics approach and some of the customers I work with. But yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can do a virtual coffee.
Absolutely. And again, guys, as I said before, Ben's LinkedIn is great, really informative. Content is if you're not a believer in CS and the importance of it, I would suggest you check out Ben's stuff and then come back to us and see if that's still the case. Ben, thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much for hopping on. Guys, hope you enjoyed the conversation and looking forward to chatting to everybody on the next episode of The Proof by Periti Digital. Have a good one, Ben. Thanks for hopping on.
Thanks, Dan. Take care.